Why does just starting a conversation in English feel so difficult for so many people? All right, so we're diving into something that I think a lot of people can relate to, starting conversations in English. I mean, that moment before you actually speak can feel pretty intense, right? You're definitely not the only one who feels that little hesitation.
Oh, absolutely. It's like that first step can feel like a giant leap, you know? It's totally natural to have all these worries popping up like, am I using the right words? Will people even understand me? Where do I even start?
And that's exactly what we're going to unpack in this deep dive. Our aim today is to give you some really practical and easy ways to get those English conversations flowing. You know, we've been looking at this helpful guide for beginners, and we've pulled out the most effective techniques to help you start chatting with more confidence right from the get-go.
Exactly. We're not going to get lost in the weeds of grammar rules or anything like that. This is about those very first steps and getting comfortable, you know, just putting yourself out there.
Right on. The guide covers a whole bunch of helpful stuff, from simple phrases you can use right away, to getting a feel for those cultural expectations around conversations, and even some mindset shifts to help you feel more relaxed. So let's jump in. Why does just starting a conversation in English feel so difficult for so many people?
Well, a big one, and it's completely understandable, is the fear of messing up. You know, maybe you're worried about grammar mistakes or pronunciation. All those little things can feel way bigger when you're in the spotlight.
It's like you're constantly editing yourself in your head before you even say anything, thinking, will this sound right? Am I going to make a fool of myself?
And you know, something interesting to think about is that even native English speakers trip over their words sometimes. The whole point of a conversation is to connect, right? To share an idea, to build a bridge with another person. Fluency and perfection, those are good goals, but they shouldn't hold you back from just starting.
That's a really great way to look at it. It's about making that connection, not just speaking perfectly. Another thing the guide brings up is that feeling of your mind going blank. You're right there face to face with someone, and suddenly all the English you thought you knew vanishes.
It's that awkward silence that seems to last forever, you know? But that's exactly where having a few reliable starting points in your back pocket becomes so valuable. And we'll definitely get to those concrete examples. The guide is really focused on giving you those solutions.
And then there's the worry about accents. I know so many learners feel self-conscious about how their English sounds.
This is interesting because it touches on identity. Your accent isn't something to be ashamed of. It's a unique part of your story and background. The guide makes a good point that it really shouldn't be a barrier to communication. In fact, for a lot of people, a non-native accent can be quite interesting and engaging.
That's such a refreshing way to think about it. It's part of what makes you you. Now, the guide also talks about a few things that can help you get over those initial hurdles. Practice, having some things ready to say, and something as simple as a smile.
Those are the building blocks, you know. Practice, because just like anything else, the more you have conversations, the easier and more natural it'll feel. Having a couple of go-to phrases or topics in mind beforehand can take a lot of the pressure off in that first moment. And a smile, well, it's universal. It instantly makes both you and the other person feel more at ease.
Okay, so we've talked about some of those common challenges. Let's move on to the really practical stuff, the actual ways to get a conversation going. The guide breaks it down into 5 pretty straightforward methods. The first one is the classic greeting plus question. What are some examples of how we can use this?
This is your basic go-to. Think of those simple, friendly greetings you hear all the time, like, hi, how's your day going? Or, hey, did you have a good weekend?
You're right, those are so natural and almost expected. You know, in everyday interactions, it doesn't feel forced at all.
Exactly. They're familiar, almost automatic responses in a lot of situations, and they give the other person a really easy way to respond. They can just say something like, good, thanks, and how about yours? And boom, the conversation started.
The second suggestion, and this one's great for people who might be a bit shy, is to comment on the situation. How can we actually use this one?
This is all about making a quick observation about what's around you or the experience you're both sharing, maybe followed by a question about it. For example, if you're at a coffee shop, you could say, this coffee shop is so cozy, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's a nice day, the weather is amazing today.
I like that because it takes the focus off of you personally. It's about something you're both experiencing at that moment.
Precisely. It gives the other person a really low-pressure chance to agree or share their own thought about it. They might say, yeah, I love the atmosphere in here. Or, I know it makes such a difference, doesn't it? It's a gentle, non-threatening way to start connecting.
The third suggestion is ask for help or opinion. I'm a fan of this one because, as the guide points out, people generally want to be helpful.
That's so true. It's like a basic human thing. Asking for help or someone's thoughts instantly creates a little connection, a shared purpose, even if it's just for a moment. Examples could be, "Excuse me, could you tell me where the nearest restroom is?" Or if you're looking at a menu, "What would you recommend here? I can't decide."
And even if they can't help directly, the interaction has started.
Yeah.
They might say, "Oh, I'm not sure about the restroom, but maybe that person over there knows," which could lead to another exchange.
You got it. And if they do know the answer or have a suggestion, you've immediately got a topic to talk about. You could ask why they like a certain dish, for instance.
The fourth tip is to give a compliment. The guide says this is a really good way to build a positive connection quickly.
And it makes sense. A genuine compliment can immediately create a good feeling, make the other person feel good. Examples could be, "I love your scarf, where'd you get it?" Or if they just finished speaking, "That was a really interesting point you made."
The key here seems to be sincerity. People can usually tell if a compliment isn't real. And the guide does say to make them specific when you can. Instead of just, "Nice jacket, maybe that color looks great on you."
That makes it feel more personal and thoughtful, less like a generic comment you could say to anyone.
Finally, the fifth suggestion for starting a conversation is to use small talk questions. Can you give us an example of one of those?
A classic one is, "Do you live around here?" These types of questions are usually open-ended enough to maybe lead to more conversation, but they're not too personal or prying right off the bat.
Right. It's a way to look for common ground without getting into their business. If they say yes, you could follow up with, "Oh, have you lived here long?" If they say no, you can ask what brought them to the area. It's a gentle way to see if there's a connection. Okay, so you've managed to start talking. What are some things to remember to keep the conversation flowing smoothly? The guide has some advice on that too.
For sure. Getting started is one thing, but knowing how to keep things moving naturally is another important skill. The guide talks about something called the two-question rule. What's great about this is how simple it is.
Okay, let's break that down. The rule is, after someone answers your question, try to ask at least one follow-up question based on their response. Could you give us an example of how that might work in a real conversation?
Definitely. Let's imagine you used one of our starters and asked, "How was your weekend?" And they say, "It was great. I finally had time to check out that new museum downtown." The two-question rule says you don't just go, "Oh, that's nice," and let it die there. Instead, you could ask, "Oh, you went to the new museum. What was the coolest exhibit?" Or, "Was it really crowded?"
That makes total sense. It shows you're really listening and interested in what they're saying, and it encourages them to keep talking.
Right. It helps avoid those awkward silences, and it gets the other person to give you more details, which gives you more to work with for the next question or comment. The guide also really emphasizes active listening. This isn't just hearing the words someone says, right?
Definitely. Active listening is about showing that you're really engaged in the conversation. The guide mentions things like nodding to show you're following along and saying things like, "Really?" or "That's interesting," to encourage them.
Those little signals go a long way. They show the other person that you're not just waiting for your turn to talk, but that you're actually interested in what they're saying. It creates a more positive and encouraging vibe.
And then the guide suggests sharing something about yourself after you've listened to the other person. How does that help keep things going and build that connection?
It creates a give and take. You know, after you've really listened to them and shown interest in what they shared, offering something about yourself helps balance the conversation and shows that you're participating too. The guide gives this example. If someone says they love cooking, you could say, "Oh, I'm not much of a cook, but I love trying new restaurants."
Right.
This shows you heard them and you're adding to the conversation.
It keeps it from feeling one-sided like an interview. It becomes a real back and forth. Now, what about when you're in the middle of a conversation and your mind just goes blank? It happens especially when you're talking in a language you're still learning. The guide offers some emergency phrases for those moments.
These are like your conversation lifesavers. The guide suggests a few really helpful ones. The first is, "Sorry, my English isn't perfect. Could you repeat that, please?" There's no need to feel awkward about needing to hear something again.
And it's way better to ask than to just nod and pretend you understood and then be totally lost.
You've got it. Another good phrase is, "I'm still learning English, but I'm really enjoying practicing." It's an honest statement that often makes the other person understand and even encourage you.
It kind of smooths over any awkwardness, doesn't it? Most people are pretty supportive when they know you're learning.
Exactly. And the last emergency phrase is, "Anyway, how about you?" The guide points out how useful this is for shifting the focus back to the other person if you get stuck or want to change the subject naturally.
That's a smart way to keep things moving without dwelling on your own little brain freeze. Now, the guide also talks about some cultural tips for politeness when you're speaking English. Understanding those unspoken rules can really affect how your conversations go.
Totally. Being aware of those cultural differences can help you navigate conversations more smoothly and avoid accidental misunderstandings. The guide says to be careful about asking super personal questions too soon. It specifically says things like age, salary, and religion are usually things to avoid when you're first getting to know someone.
That makes sense. Those are pretty private topics in a lot of English-speaking cultures when you're just meeting someone. It's good to build some rapport first.
Right. Jumping into those personal things too fast can make people uncomfortable. The guide also talks about those potentially awkward silences that can happen.
This is something a lot of learners worry about, those moments when no one's saying anything.
The guide says that if you find yourself in a silent moment, just smiling and saying something like, so, or anyway, can be a good way to bridge the gap and give you a second to think.
It's a way to acknowledge the silence without making it weird, and it gives you a little time. And finally, the guide recommends using polite fillers during the conversation itself. What are some examples of those?
Think of those short positive responses that show you're listening, like, that's cool, wow, or I see.
Yeah.
These little phrases show that you're paying attention and giving positive feedback without needing a long, complicated answer.
They're like little verbal nods saying, I'm here, I'm with you, without having to actually say it.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've covered a lot in this deep dive, from understanding why starting conversations can feel tough, to giving you specific ways to start them, keep them going, handle those moments when you blank out, and even some cultural things to keep in mind.
And what's so great about all of this is how practical and easy to use this advice is. It's not about memorizing tons of grammar rules. It's about using simple, effective techniques and building up your confidence.
Absolutely. And the guide ends with a really important message. Starting conversations is a skill that gets better over time with practice. It encourages learners to not get discouraged by any mistakes and to focus on the good part, making connections with other people.
That's a key takeaway. Every interaction, even a quick one at the store or with a neighbor, gives you practice and helps you feel more confident.
So as you're thinking about all of this, here's a final thought for you. How might actually using these simple conversation starters and techniques open up new possibilities and connections in your personal life, your work life, all the places where you interact with English speakers? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.